Hello everyone, I am Alex and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? What time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The realtor never told me about David Foster until after I signed the lease. I only learned about him when Mrs. Chen from next door brought it up while I was unloading my moving truck. You know what happened to the last tenant, right? She asked, watching me struggle with a heavy box. When I shook my head, she told me how Foster had run screaming from the house one night 6 months ago, wearing only his underwear. He ended up in Spring Grove Hospital's psychiatric ward, babbling about curses and footsteps in the upstairs hallway. I laughed it off. The row house was a steal for Baltimore. $200 a month for a restored 1890s Victorian with original hardwood floors and crown molding. Sure, it needed some work. The radiators clanked. Some floorboards creaked. The shared wall with Unit 42B transmitted sound too easily. But after my divorce, I couldn't be picky. I needed an affordable place close to my new job at Johns Hopkins, and 42A Sycamore Street fit the bill. The first week passed without incident. I settled into a routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., shower, coffee, commute downtown to the hospital where I worked as a radiologist, come home, microwave dinner, watch Netflix, sleep. The house's quirks became familiar, the way the front door stuck slightly, the loose step on the stairs, the faint smell of old wood and plaster. The neighboring unit stayed empty. Then came the footsteps. I first heard them on a Tuesday night in October around 2 a.m. The sound yanked me from sleep. Heavy thuds moved across the second floor hallway right above my bedroom. They were slow, deliberate steps like someone wearing work boots. Thud. Pause. Thud. Pause. The ancient floorboards groaned under each impact. My first thought was burglars. I grabbed my phone and a baseball bat I kept under the bed, my heart pounding as I crept up the stairs. The second floor was pitch black except for street light filtering through the windows. I checked every room, the empty spare bedroom, the bathroom, the small office I'd set up. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. The footsteps had stopped. I told myself it was just the house settling. These old places made weird noises. Everyone knew that. But the next night, same time, the footsteps returned. This time they paced back and forth for nearly an hour. I lay rigid in bed, my bat clutched to my chest, listening to the slow, methodical thuds traverse the hallway above me. After the third night, I called my landlord. Look, he said, the place is over 100 years old. Pipes expand and contract. Wooden beams shift. It's normal. This and the building settling, I insisted. These are footsteps, heavy ones. He sighed. Mr. Walker, I assure you, the second floor is structurally sound. We had it inspected before you moved in. If you're really concerned, I can send someone to check it out next week. But I couldn't wait that long. The footsteps came every night now, always around 2 a.m., always with the same slow, heavy rhythm. I started sleeping with every light in the house. I installed a security system. I even called the police one night, but by the time they arrived, the sounds had stopped. They found nothing suspicious. The lack of sleep started affecting my work. I dozed off while reviewing chest x-rays, mixed up patient files. My supervisor noticed and suggested I take some time off. Instead, I grew obsessed with researching the house's history. The Baltimore County Records Office had documents dating back to its construction in 1891. Nothing remarkable stood out, just a series of owners and tenants over the decades. No deaths were recorded at the address. No violent crimes. The most recent entry showed David Foster's rental agreement from January to April of the previous year. I tracked Foster down at Spring Grove Hospital. Getting in to see him wasn't easy. I had to pretend to be a relative. When they finally brought him to the visiting room, I barely recognized him from the driver's license photo in his rental application. His hair had gone completely gray, deep lines creased his face. His hands trembled constantly. The footsteps, he said as soon as I sat down. You're hearing them too, aren't you? Always at 2 a.m., I leaned forward. What are they? What's causing them? Foster's eyes darted around the room. It's not what, it's who. The original owner, Harrison Blake. He built both houses, lived in 42A, died there too in 1916. Fell down the stairs and broke his neck. He grabbed my arm, but he never left. He's still there, pacing, always pacing, looking for something. There's no record of anyone dying in the house, I said, because they covered it up. His family didn't want a scandal, but I found letters, old newspapers. Blake was obsessed with the occult, conducted rituals in the basement, tried to contact the dead. Foster's voice dropped to a whisper. He succeeded too well, opened a door he couldn't close. That's why the footsteps never stop. That's why they get louder, closer, until a nurse appeared. "Time's up, Mr. Foster." As they led him away, he shouted back at me, "Check the basement, behind the coal chute." The truth is there. I spent that afternoon in the basement with a flashlight. The old coal chute was still there, sealed up decades ago when the house converted to gas heat. Behind it, I found a loose brick. Inside the cavity was a metal box, badly rusted. It contained a leather-bound journal, the pages yellow and brittle. The handwriting was cramped but legible. Harrison Blake's personal diary. Most entries were mundane business records, but they grew increasingly erratic in the months before his death. He wrote about experiments with seances and spirit boards, about voices in the walls, about footsteps that followed him through the house. The final entry was dated October 31st. "It's here. God help me. It's here. I can hear it coming up the stairs." The ritual worked, but I was wrong about everything. So wrong. It's not a door to the other side. It's a door to something else. Something that was never meant to be. The entry ended mid-sentence. That night, the footsteps started earlier, 1 a.m., and they were different. Faster, more purposeful. They moved from the hallway into the spare bedroom directly above me. There was a scratching sound, like nails dragging across hardwood. Then silence. I lay in bed, every muscle tense, listening. The digital clock on my nightstand clicked over to 1:59 a.m. A floorboard creaked at the top of the stairs. Another creaked halfway down. Another. 3 steps from the bottom. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in white clouds. The final step groaned. Heavy footsteps crossed my bedroom floor, slow and deliberate. The mattress compressed on one side like someone sitting down. I felt hot breath on my face. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything, not my phone, not my wallet, not even shoes. I sprinted out the front door in my boxers and t-shirt, bare feet slapping the sidewalk as I ran through the dark streets. Behind me, a deep laugh echoed from the house's open doorway. They found me 3 blocks away, huddled in a corner store doorway, shivering and babbling. The police report noted signs of extreme psychological distress, but no evidence of an intruder or break-in at 42A Sycamore Street. The hospital admitted me for observation. They said it was acute stress reaction, possible psychotic break. I checked myself out after 2 days against medical advice. I never went back to the house. Left everything there. Furniture, clothes, family photos. The landlord kept my security deposit and first month's rents. I didn't care. I'm staying with my sister in Philadelphia now, looking for a new job, a new place to live. Somewhere modern. No history. No basements. But sometimes late at night, I still hear them, heavy footsteps moving slowly across a distant floor. And I wonder about 42A Sycamore Street, about what Harrison Blake really found with his rituals, about the door he opened. The house is for rent again. It's $200 a month, a steal for Baltimore. The footsteps are waiting for the next tenant. I shouldn't have gone to check on those sounds. That's what everyone says in these situations, right? But I did check, and now I can forget what happened that night at Riverside Commerce Building. I need to write it down to make sense of it. Maybe someone will believe me. It was Tuesday, October 15th. I remember because I had a major deadline the next morning. Quarterly reports that my boss Thompson needed by 9 a.m. sharp. The cleaning crew had left hours ago and the old building's heating system had switched to night mode, making the radiators tick and pop in that familiar way. I'd been crunching numbers at my desk since 8 a.m., surviving on vending machine coffee and stale granola bars. The clock on my computer showed 11:42 p.m. when the first bang echoed through the empty office. I jumped, knocking over my cold coffee. The sound came from down the hall, near the storage room. Just thinking about it makes my hands shake. It's an old room from when this building was a textile factory in the 1920s. Heavy oak door, brass handle, always locked. We keep old files and equipment there now. I'd only been inside once during my first week when Thompson gave me the office tour. The bang came again, louder this time, like someone hitting a metal filing cabinet with their fist. I stood up, my chair squeaking against the linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked to my office door and peered into the hallway. Bang, bang, bang. The sounds got louder, more insistent, like someone was trapped inside trying to get out. But that was impossible. The door was always locked, and I had the only key on this floor, a heavy brass thing Thompson had given me for emergencies. I reached for my phone to call security, then remembered they'd left at 10 p.m., budget cuts. The night guard only patrolled the ground floor now. The banging continued, rhythmic and desperate. What if someone was actually trapped in there? Maybe one of the cleaning staff had gotten locked in somehow. I couldn't just ignore it. I walked down the dark hallway, my footsteps echoing on the worn carpet. The emergency lights cast long shadows on the walls. The banging got louder as I approached. My hands were sweating as I pulled out the key. The brass handle was ice cold. I turned the key and the old lock clicked open. The banging stopped instantly. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open. "Is someone in here?" The storage room was pitch black. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling against the wall. When I found it, the fluorescent tubes flickered to life with a buzz. Empty. The room was completely empty of people. Just rows of metal filing cabinets, cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, and old office furniture covered in dust sheets. But something was wrong. The air felt different, heavy and thick with a musty smell that made my nose wrinkle like wet cardboard and rotting wood. The temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. My skin prickled with goosebumps. It had to be at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. I took a step inside, my shoes crunching on something. Looking down, I saw a thin layer of frost coating the concrete floor. That was impossible. It was October and the building's heating was still working. I could hear the radiator ticking in the hallway behind me. The door slammed shut. I spun around, grabbing for the handle. It wouldn't turn. I pulled harder, rattling it, but it was locked somehow. The key was still in my hand, but when I tried to put it in the lock, it wouldn't fit. Like the lock had changed shape. The lights flickered and the musty smell got stronger. A shadow moved in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the rows of filing cabinets stretching into the darkness at the back of the room. My phone, I pulled it out of my pocket with shaking hands. No signal. Of course there was no signal. The storage room walls were thick concrete, and WED always had reception problems down here. Another movement caught my eye. This time when I turned, I saw one of the dust sheets ripple. There was no wind in here, no vents, no windows. Nothing that could make fabric move like that. The temperature dropped again. Frost on the floor spread, crackling as it formed. My teeth started chattering. I could feel the cold seeping through my shoes, numbing my feet. Bang! The sound came from inside one of the filing cabinets. Then another, and another. All around the room, metal drawers began to shake and rattle. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. I backed up against the door, trying the handle again. Still locked. The banging got louder, faster. Dust sheets began to flutter violently, like they were being whipped by a storm. Papers flew out of boxes, swirling in the air. The lights flickered faster now, strobe-like flashes that turned the room into a series of frozen moments. In one flash, I saw a figure standing at the back of the room, tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling. In the next flash, it was closer, and the next closer still. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The cold had reached my chest, making each breath painful. The figure was getting closer with each flicker of the lights. I could smell its presence, that overwhelming stench of decay and age. Flash, 10 feet away. Its form was wrong. Limbs too long, joints bent at impossible angles. Flash, 5 feet, I could see where its face should be. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over bone. Flash, 3 feet, a hand reaching toward me. Fingers like pale spider legs. The lights went out. I felt something cold brush against my cheek. A whisper in my ear, in a voice that sounded like rustling paper. "You shouldn't be here." I screamed. My body finally responded, and I slammed myself against the door. It burst open, sending me sprawling into the hallway. I scrambled to my feet and ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until I reached my car in the parking lot. The next morning, I arrived at work late. Thompson was angry about the quarterly reports, but I couldn't care less. I walked straight to the storage room. The door was locked, just like always. When I unlocked it, Everything was normal, no frost, no scattered papers. The temperature was fine, but the smell was still there. Faint, but unmistakable. And when I checked the security footage from the previous night, trying to prove to myself that something had happened, I found that the cameras had stopped recording between 11:40 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. Just static. I gave my 2 weeks notice that afternoon. Found a new job across town. But I still dream about that night. About the cold and the banging and that figure in the darkness. Sometimes when I'm working late at my new office, I hear a faint knocking sound. And even though I know it's just the heating system or the building settling, I pack up my things and leave. Because now I know what lives in old buildings after dark, what hides in locked rooms and empty spaces, what waits behind closed doors, making sounds that shouldn't be there, hoping someone will be curious enough to investigate. I know, and I can never forget. I've written this down as a warning. If you're working late and you hear strange sounds coming from somewhere you know should be empty, don't investigate. Don't unlock any doors. Just leave. Leave immediately. Because if you open that door like I did, you might find out that some rooms aren't meant to be opened. Some spaces aren't meant to be explored. And some things are locked away for a very good reason. I still have nightmares about what I saw in that storage room. But what really keeps me awake at night is a different thought. What if I hadn't been able to get out? What if that thing had kept me there in that cold darkness? What if I'd become another sound in the night? Banging on the door, hoping someone would be foolish enough to check. Sometimes when I drive past my old office building late at night, I look up at the windows. Most are dark, but occasionally I see a light on in someone's office. Someone working late like I used to. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a shadow move behind those lit windows, something tall and wrong with 2 long limbs and no face. I want to warn them, tell them to go home before it gets dark. But who would believe me? Who would listen to a story about impossible, cold-locked doors that unlock themselves in figures that shouldn't exist? So I drive on, and I hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they never have to learn what I learned that night, that some sounds should go uninvestigated. Some doors should stay locked, and some rooms should remain unopened. Because now I know the truth about old buildings and empty rooms. They are not always as empty as they seem. And sometimes when something makes a sound it shouldn't make, the worst thing you can do is go and check. I know that now. I just wish I'd known it then. My hands were shaking when I pulled that piece of paper from my coat pocket. Just a folded scrap, yellowed and creased, with 5 words scrawled in messy handwriting. I should have thrown it away. Should have tossed it in with the other garbage I was sorting through at the thrift store. Instead, I read those words again. Now he is behind you. I've worked at Second Time Around Thrift for 3 years now. Every day I sort through donations, price items, and stock shelves. It's mindless work, but it pays the bills. That Tuesday started like any other. Mountains of garbage bags filled with clothes were dumped at our back door overnight. I was going through them one by one, separating what we could sell from what needed to be trashed. The coat was nothing special, brown wool, probably from the 80s, with worn elbows and a torn lining. As I checked the pockets before throwing it in the reject pile, my fingers brushed against paper. Probably an old receipt or grocery list, but I always check. You'd be amazed at what people forget in their pockets. Cash, jewelry, love letters, photographs. When I unfolded the note, the hair on my arm stood up. The handwriting was jagged, pressed deep into the paper like whoever wrote it was desperate. Just those 5 words, no date, no signature. I looked behind me, the empty sorting room was just clothes and boxes. But my neck tingled, like someone had just blown cold air across it. Get it together, I muttered. I crumpled the note and aimed for the trash can, but couldn't let go. Something about those words dug into my brain. I smoothed the paper out and slipped it into my pocket. The rest of my shift crawled by. Every few minutes, my hand would drift to my pocket, touching the note through the fabric. Twice I caught myself looking over my shoulder at nothing. By the time I clocked out at 6, I was jumpy enough that I rushed to my car without saying goodbye to anyone. The drive home was normal. Traffic was light, and the sky was going dark with winter coming on. I live alone in a small ranch house on the outskirts of town. Used to love how quiet it was out there. As I pulled into my gravel driveway, the silence felt different, heavy, watching. I went through my usual routine, kicked off my shoes, microwaved leftover pasta, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down to watch TV, but couldn't focus on the screen. The note was still in my pocket, burning against my leg. I took it out and set it on the coffee table. The first knock came at 8:47, 3 sharp raps on my kitchen door. I muted the TV, and my heart suddenly pounded. Nobody uses that door. It opens onto my backyard, which is fenced in. The only way to reach it is through the gate, which I always keep locked. I waited, barely breathing. Nothing but silence. Then 3 more knocks, harder this time. I stood up slowly, legs shaking. "Who's there?" My voice came out as a croak. No answer. I crept to the kitchen, staying away from the windows. The door was solid wood, with no window. The knocking came again, right in front of me. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped back, stumbling against the counter. "This isn't funny," I shouted. "I'm calling the police." I grabbed my phone from my pocket with trembling fingers. As I dialed 911, something scraped against the door like nails or claws being dragged down the wood. The sound went on and on, setting my teeth on edge. The 911 operator answered. I tried to explain, but halfway through describing the knocking, it stopped. Complete silence fell. I waited, phone pressed to my ear, while the operator asked if I was still there. I think they're gone," I said finally. "I'm sorry. Maybe it was just kids playing a prank." But I knew it wasn't kids. The scratching had come from too high up the door, and something about the rhythm of those knocks, deliberate and patient, like whatever was out there had all the time in the world. I spent the next hour checking all my doors and windows. Everything was locked tight. I drew all the curtains and turned on every light in the house. The note sat on my coffee table where I'd left it. I picked it up, read those 5 words again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. A sound from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and heavy, creaking across the floor of my bedroom. But I live in a ranch house. There is no upstairs. I ran, grabbed my keys and phone, yanked open the front door, and stopped dead. All the lights on my street were out. Not just porch lights or house lights, but the street lamps too. Pure darkness pressed against my doorway like a solid wall. The footsteps were getting closer, coming down stairs that didn't exist, each creak bringing them nearer. I slammed the door and locked it, then ran to the kitchen. Had to get out the back door, had to run, The kitchen door was open. I knew I'd checked it, knew it had been locked, but now it stood wide open to the night. Cold air poured in, carrying a smell like wet earth and rotting leaves. Beyond the doorway was nothing but blackness. The footsteps reached the bottom of the imaginary stairs. They started down my hallway, slow and steady. Each step made the floor vibrate under my feet. I backed away from the open door, bumping into the kitchen counter. My phone was in my hand. I could call 911 again. I could call someone, anyone. But when I looked at the screen, it was black. Not turned off, but black. Like someone had filled the screen with ink that swirled and shifted as I watched. The footsteps reached the kitchen doorway. I couldn't look. I didn't want to see what was making those heavy steps. But my eyes were drawn up against my will. Nothing. The doorway was empty. But the footsteps kept coming, crossing the kitchen tile, getting closer, closer. The note was still clutched in my other hand, crumpled into a ball. As the invisible steps reached the center of my kitchen, I uncurled the paper with shaking fingers. The words had changed. Told you so. Something cold brushed against my shoulder, a hand, but wrong. Too many fingers, too long, too cold. I spun around and I woke up on my kitchen floor. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The back door was closed and locked. My phone lay next to me, working normally. Everything looked exactly as it should, except for the deep scratches gouged into my kitchen door, except for the muddy footprints on my tile floor. Huge prints, not made by any human feet. Except for the note, now torn to shreds and scattered across the counter. I called in sick to work. Spent the morning in a daze trying to convince myself that it had been a dream or a hallucination. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt those cold fingers on my shoulder. Every silence seemed to hide footsteps. That was yesterday. I'm writing this all down now because I need someone to know what happened. Need there to be a record. Because it's getting dark again, and I can hear something moving around in the crawl space under my house. Something big, dragging itself closer to the access panel in my hallway floor. The scratching has started again, this time coming from underneath. The panel is rattling, metal groaning as something pushes up from below. I should run. I should get in my car and drive until I run out of gas. But I know it wouldn't matter. Those 5 words keep echoing in my head. Now he is behind you. And he is. I can feel him standing there. Even though when I turn around, there's nothing but empty air. I can smell wet earth and decay getting stronger. I can hear breathing that isn't mine. The access panel just broke open. I hear something pulling itself out, joints cracking as it unfolds. Heavy footsteps on the hallway floor, coming closer, closer. If you're reading this, don't look in coat pockets at thrift stores. Don't read notes left by strangers. Don't. He's here. A week has passed, but my hands still shake when I think about what happened in that factory. The doctors say I'm experiencing acute stress disorder. They've prescribed pills that are supposed to help me sleep, but pills can erase what I felt that night. What brushed against me in that dark corridor. I need to write this down to get it out of my system. Maybe then I'll stop jumping at every shadow. It started as just another urban exploration trip with my usual crew, Mike, Sarah, and Danny. We'd been doing this for 2 years, checking out abandoned buildings around the Rust Belt. The old Riverside manufacturing plant had been on our list for months. The massive complex had shut down in 2008, leaving behind 5 acres of deteriorating industrial buildings. I remember the exact moment we pulled up to the chain-link fence that Thursday night. The factory's broken windows stared down at us, like empty eye sockets. The security light above the loading dock flickered weakly, creating moving shadows that made the building seem alive. Danny had his usual shit-eating grin as he cut through the fence with his bolt cutters. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner is served," he said, pulling back the fence to create an opening. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Real classy, Dan." Mike was already checking his camera gear. "Remember, guys, we stick together. No wandering off alone this time." He looked directly at me when he said this. "Last month I'd separated from the group in an abandoned hospital and ended up falling through some rotted floorboards. Nearly broke my leg." Yeah, I got it," I said, adjusting my headlamp. Team safety first. The late October air bit through my jacket as we crossed the empty parking lot. Weeds had broken through the asphalt, creating a maze of cracks. Our footsteps crunched on broken glass and gravel. The sound echoed off the factory walls, making it seem like someone was walking behind us. The main entrance was boarded up, but we found a broken window on the ground floor. Danny went first, then Sarah, followed by Mike. I brought up the rear as I climbed through, my boot caught on the windowsill. I stumbled, sending an empty soda can skittering across the floor. The metallic sound rang out in the darkness. "Smooth move," Danny whispered. The beam of my headlamp cut through the gloom. We were in what looked like an old break room. Trash and debris covered the floor. A row of rusted lockers lined one wall, their doors hanging open. The ceiling had partially collapsed, letting in slivers of moonlight. Mike was already taking photos, his camera flash briefly illuminating the room in harsh white light. Sarah walked over to one of the lockers and peered inside. "Check this out," she said, pulling something out. It was an old time card, the paper yellow with age. "It says 1986, she said. "Wonder what happened to whoever this belonged to. Probably retired to Florida," Danny said, "or dead." We moved deeper into the building, following what appeared to be the main corridor. Our headlamp beams bounced off peeling paint and exposed pipes. Every few feet, doorways opened into dark rooms filled with silent machinery. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. The layout was confusing, a maze of interconnected hallways and production areas. Mike kept checking his phone, trying to match our location to the building plans he'd found online. After about 20 minutes, we reached a large open space that must have been the main production floor. The ceiling here rose at least 40 feet, supported by massive steel beams. Rows of assembly lines stretched into the darkness. Conveyor belts hung limp like dead snakes. Above us, a network of catwalks crisscrossed the space. "This is incredible," Mike said, his camera clicking rapidly. Sarah was already climbing onto one of the conveyor belts. "Hey guys, I bet we can follow this to see where it goes." We spent the next hour exploring the production floor, documenting everything with photos and video. Danny found an old control panel and pretended to operate it, making machine noises like a kid. Sarah discovered a collection of employee photos, still hanging on a bulletin board in what had been a supervisor's office. The faces stared out at us from behind clouded plastic, frozen in time. It was when we decided to check out the second floor that things started to feel wrong. The steel stairs creaked under our weight as we climbed. At the top, the hallway split into 2 directions. "Left or right?" Danny asked. Mike consulted his phone. Left should take us towards the administrative offices. Right goes to more production areas. Offices might have more interesting stuff to find, Sarah said. Documents, photos, that kind of thing. We turned left. This corridor was narrower than the ones downstairs. The ceiling was lower too, creating a more claustrophobic feeling. Water damage had caused the walls to bubble and peel. Every few yards, black mold spread across the surface like bruises. The offices were in bad shape. Years of exposure to the elements had rotted most of the furniture. Paper lay everywhere, turned to pulp by water over time. The few items that remained intact were covered in a thick layer of dust. Sarah found an old desk calendar, still open to October 1986. She photographed it while Danny rummaged through filing cabinets. Mike was focused on capturing the decay, the way nature was slowly reclaiming the space. I hung back, scanning my light beam across the walls. Something about this area felt different. The air seemed heavier, more oppressive. I noticed that the temperature had dropped several degrees. "Hey guys," I called out. "Anyone else feel how cold it got up here?" "Old buildings like this always have weird temperature changes," Mike said, not looking up from his camera. "Probably just a draft from somewhere." We continued moving through the offices. The corridor took several turns, leading us deeper into the building. I tried to keep track of our route, but soon lost my bearings. The identical doorways and peeling walls all blended together. After about 15 minutes, we reached another set of stairs leading up to the third floor. A metal sign, barely legible under years of grime, read, "Red Executive Offices." "Should we check it out?" Danny asked. Sarah checked her watch. "We've been here almost 2 hours. Maybe we should start heading back." "Come on, we're already here," Danny said. "When are we going to get another chance to see this place?" Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed from somewhere behind us. We all jumped, our headlamp beams swung wildly around. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. "Probably just something falling," Mike said, but his voice was tense. "These places are always settling." We stood silent for a moment, listening. The only sound was our breathing and the faint drip of water somewhere in the darkness. "Let's just check out the third floor quickly and then head back," Danny suggested. No one argued. We climbed the stairs. The metal steps rang hollow under our feet. At the top, we found ourselves in a short hallway ending in a set of double doors. Brass letters on the wall spelled out "boardroom." The doors were locked, but Danny made quick work of them with his crowbar. They opened with a grinding screech that set my teeth on edge. Our lights revealed a large conference room dominated by a massive wooden table. The far wall was all windows, though most of the glass was broken. "Now this is more like it," Danny said, walking around the table. "Check out this view." We spread out to explore the room. Mike focused on photographing the elaborate light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. Sarah examined the built-in cabinets along one wall. I walked over to the windows, careful to avoid the broken glass on the floor. From this height, I could see most of the factory complex spread out below. The moonlight gave everything a silvery, otherworldly quality. Movement caught my eye. Probably a bird or a plastic bag caught in the wind. That's when I first felt it, a slight change in the air pressure, like when someone walks past you very quickly. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but they were all still occupied with their exploring on the other side of the room. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was just a draft from the broken windows, but something felt off. The sensation had been too distinct, too purposeful. "Hey guys," I said, my voice sounding strange in my ears. "I think maybe we should." But before I could finish, all our headlamps flickered simultaneously. For a split second, we were plunged into complete darkness. When the lights came back on, everyone was looking around nervously. "Okay, that was weird," Sarah said. "Battery interference, maybe?" "All 4 lights at exactly the same time," Mike asked. "That's not normal." "Let's get out of here," I said. Something in my tone must have conveyed my unease, because no one argued. We made our way back to the stairs, moving faster than before. The temperature seemed to be dropping rapidly. I could see my breath forming clouds in my headlamp beam. As we descended to the second floor, I noticed the sounds of our footsteps had changed. Instead of 4 sets of steps, I could distinctly hear 5. The extra footfalls were slightly out of sync with ours, like someone following just a bit too slowly. I stopped and turned around, shining my light up the stairs. Nothing was there, but the footsteps continued for a fraction of a second after we'd all stopped moving. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked. Hear what? Danny said, but I could see the tension in his face. Before I could explain, a door slammed somewhere above us. The sound echoed through the stairwell like a gunshot. Sarah let out a small scream. Run, Mike said quietly, then louder. Run. We bolted down the stairs, taking them two at a time. I was at the back of the group again. As we reached the second floor landing, I felt it again, that sensation of something passing close by. But this time it was stronger, more defined. I could have sworn I felt fabric brush against my arm, and then I heard it. A deep, raspy breath right behind my left ear. I froze. The others were already halfway down the corridor, their headlamp beams bouncing wildly as they ran. I wanted to call out to them, but my voice wouldn't work. The breathing continued, heavy and wet, like someone who had been running for a long time. Slowly, fighting against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned my head. My headlamp illuminated empty air, but the breathing didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. That's when I noticed the dust motes in my light beam. They were swirling in a distinct pattern, as if being disturbed by something I couldn't see, something roughly the size and shape of a person. The scream that tore from my throat didn't sound human. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, chasing after the retreating lights of my friends. The breathing followed me, along with the sound of rapid footsteps that were definitely not my own. I caught up with the others at the bottom of the main stairs. They were waiting for me, faces pale in the glow of their headlamps. What happened? Mike demanded. What was that scream? I couldn't speak. I just pointed back up the stairs, trying to catch my breath. That's when we all heard it, footsteps descending the stairs behind me. Heavy, deliberate steps. But our light showed nothing there. We ran for the exit. I don't remember much of that journey through the dark corridors. Everything was a blur of panic and adrenaline. Somehow, we found our way back to the broken window we'd entered through. Danny went through first. Then he helped Sarah. Mike pushed me ahead of him. As I climbed through, I felt something grab my ankle. The touch was ice cold and felt like fingers, but when I kicked and yanked my leg free, nothing was visible. We didn't stop running until we reached Mike's car. Sarah was crying. Danny looked like he was going to be sick. Mike's hands were shaking so badly that he dropped his keys twice before managing to unlock the doors. As we peeled out of the parking lot, I looked back at the factory. In the third-floor window, the boardroom where we'd been, I saw a light, not our headlamps, but a pale bluish glow. As I watched, it moved away from the window and disappeared into the darkness. The police didn't believe us when we reported what happened. They said we were probably spooked by homeless people or other urban explorers. The building inspector we talked to told us that the third floor of that section had been condemned and sealed off in 1986 after a fatal accident. He wouldn't give us details. I've done some research since then. In October 1986, a factory foreman named Robert Henley disappeared during his night shift. His body was never found. The official report said he probably fell into some machinery, but no trace of him was ever discovered. The factory closed its third-floor executive offices after that, and rumors spread about strange sounds and unexplained accidents. I haven't gone urban exploring since that night. The others haven't either. Sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I think I hear heavy breathing behind me. When I turn around, nothing's there. But the air feels colder, and the dust motes dance in patterns that look almost like footprints. I know what I felt in that factory. I know what we all heard. But I also know that no one will ever believe us. Some things are better left unexplored, some places better left abandoned, and some stories like this one are better left untold. But I still check behind me every time I walk down a hallway, and I never ever want to be the last person in line again. I still wake up some nights with my heart racing, sheets soaked in sweat, remembering that weekend at Blackwood Trail. The rational part of my brain tells me there has to be a logical explanation for what happened. But my body remembers the terror. This is everything that occurred during those 48 hours, as best as I can recall it. It started as a normal camping trip. Mark and I had been planning it for weeks. Just a regular 2-day getaway to disconnect from our phones and drink some beers around a campfire. We'd known each other since college, and these weekend trips had become our tradition. This one was supposed to be like all the others. We picked a spot we'd never been to before, about 3 hours north of Seattle, following a recommendation from Mark's coworker who said the fishing was good there. We arrived at the trailhead around 2 in the afternoon on Saturday. The parking lot was empty except for a beaten-up red pickup truck parked in the corner. The air was cold and damp, Typical Pacific Northwest weather for early October. I shouldered my pack while Mark checked his phone one last time before we lost signal. The forecast said clear skies tonight, he said, stuffing the phone in his jacket pocket. That would be perfect for stargazing. The trail started off easy enough, winding through tall Douglas firs and western red cedars. Our boots crunched on fallen leaves and broken twigs. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird call and the sound of a stream somewhere in the distance. After about an hour of hiking, we found a decent clearing about 50 yards off the main trail. This looks good, Mark said, dropping his pack. Flat ground, good tree coverage, close enough to water. I agreed, and we started setting up camp. We had it down to a science after years of doing this. Mark handled the tent, while I gathered firewood and cleared a space for the fire pit. By 4 o'clock, we had everything set up. Our 4-person tent, camp chairs, and a neat pile of firewood ready for later. We spent the afternoon fishing at the nearby stream. The water was clear and cold, running fast over smooth rocks. We caught a couple of small trout. Nothing worth keeping, so we released them back into the stream. As the sun started to set, we headed back to camp to start dinner. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. Our camp chairs had been moved, not knocked over by the wind. They were now facing the trees instead of the fire pit where we left them. Mark didn't seem concerned. Probably some hikers passed by and used them for a quick rest, he said, turning them back around. I nodded, but something felt off. We hadn't seen or heard anyone else on the trail all day, and our camp was invisible from the main path. Still, I pushed the thought aside and focused on getting the fire started. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset. We sat around the fire, eating freeze-dried stroganoff and drinking beer, swapping the same old stories we always did. Everything felt normal until about 9 o'clock when Mark suddenly stopped mid-sentence and tilted his head. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first, all I could hear was the crackling of the fire and the usual forest sounds. Then, I heard it. Voices. They were too far away to make out any words, but they sounded like they were coming from somewhere in the darkness behind our tent. The voices were muffled, like people trying to talk quietly but not quite succeeding. "Hello?" Mark called out. His voice echoed slightly through the trees. No response. We sat in silence for a few minutes, straining to hear more. The voices had stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam through the trees, but the light only reached about 30 feet before being swallowed by darkness. Nothing moved in the illuminated areas, except shadows cast by the swaying branches. Probably just other campers, I said, not believing it myself. The voices hadn't sounded like normal camping chatter. They'd sounded urgent, almost angry, like people having an argument but trying to keep their voices down. We stayed up another hour, but the voices didn't return. The fire had burned down to embers when we decided to turn in. I made, then slipped into my sleeping bag. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The moon was bright enough that I could see Mark's outline in his sleeping bag next to me. He was sitting up, completely still. "Mark," I whispered. "There's someone out there." He whispered back, "Listen." I held my breath. Footsteps crunched, and the leaves outside our tent, slow and deliberate. They circled the tent once, twice, then stopped near the entrance. The shadow of a figure fell across the tent wall, visible in the moonlight. It stood there, not moving, not making a sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for my knife with trembling fingers. The shadow remained still for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it moved away, and the footsteps resumed, heading into the forest. Neither of us spoke until the sound had completely faded away. Mark switched on his flashlight. "We need to check outside," he said. "Are you crazy?" "We should stay in the tent. What if they're messing with our food or our cars?" He had a point. We couldn't afford to lose our supplies or end up stranded. We grabbed our flashlights and knives and unzipped the tent as quietly as possible. The clearing looked exactly as we'd left it. The fire pit held cold ashes. Our chair sat empty around it, and the bare canister was untouched. We swept our lights through the surrounding trees, but saw nothing unusual. "Look at this," Mark said suddenly. His light beam was focused on the ground near the tent. A single boot print was pressed into the soft earth, much larger than either of our boots. We did a complete circuit of our campsite, finding nothing else out of place. The forest had fallen silent. No insects chirped, no night birds called, just absolute silence. Maybe we should pack up, I suggested. Hike out now. Mark shook his head. It's too dangerous to hike at night. We'd probably break an ankle or get lost. Better to wait until morning. We went back into the tent, but neither of us slept. We sat up against our packs, knives ready. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made us flinch. Around 3 in the morning, the voices returned. They were closer this time, and there were more of them. They seemed to be all around us, moving through the trees, still speaking in those urgent, muffled tones. I couldn't make out any words, but the voices didn't sound entirely right. The cadence was off. The pitch was unusual. Then we saw the shadows. Our tent was illuminated by the moon. Dark shapes moved across the walls. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that weren't quite natural. They passed back and forth, circling our tent like sharks. Mark gripped my arm so hard it hurt. Neither of us dared to breathe. The shadows kept moving, and the voices grew louder, more agitated. Still no clear words, just that weird, muffled arguing. A sharp sound cut through the noise, the distinct snap of a branch breaking nearby. The voices stopped immediately. The shadows disappeared. Complete silence fell over the forest again. The sound of tearing fabric filled the tent. A long slash appeared in the wall near our feet, as if cut by an invisible knife. Cold air rushed in through the opening. Mark's flashlight beam darted to the tier, but nothing was there. No knife, no hand, nothing visible that could have caused it. Another rip appeared on the opposite wall, then another. Tiers opened up all around us, but we couldn't see what was causing them. The voices started again, louder now, almost at shouting volume, but still muffled, still incomprehensible. "Run!" Mark yelled. We grabbed our packs and burst out of the tent through the entrance, not waiting to unzip it properly, just tearing through the fabric. The clearing was empty. The voices came from all directions, but there was no one there. Nothing visible moved in the trees. We ran. We left everything except our packs, sprinting down the trail by moonlight. Branches whipped our faces. Roots tried to trip us. Behind us, voices followed, keeping pace and getting closer. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. My lungs burned. My legs screamed for rest. But the voices kept coming. Now there were footsteps too, dozens of them crashing through the undergrowth behind us. The sky was starting to lighten when we reached the parking lot. The red pickup truck was gone. We threw ourselves into my car and I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before getting them into the ignition. As we peeled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror, just enough to see it. A dark shape stood at the tree line, impossibly tall and thin, watching us leave. We drove straight home without stopping. Neither of us spoke until we were back in the city, surrounded by normal Sunday morning traffic and confused joggers who stared at our scratched faces and torn clothes. "We need to go back," Mark said finally. "In daylight, get our stuff. Report this to the Rangers." I agreed. We stopped at my place to clean up and grab some coffee, then drove back to the trailhead. It took us 3 hours to reach our campsite, following our own trail of broken branches and trampled undergrowth from our panicked flight. The clearing looked completely normal in daylight. Our tents still stood there, slashed to ribbons. The camp chairs sat exactly where we'd left them. The fire pit held cold ashes. Even our bare canister was untouched, but there were no footprints except our own. No sign of the multiple people who must have made all those voices. All those footsteps existed. We searched the surrounding area and found nothing. No candy wrappers, no cigarette butts, no broken branches, no signs that anyone else had been there at all. We packed up what we could salvage and hiked out. We filed a report with the Rangers, who looked skeptical, but wrote everything down. They said they'd investigate, but I never heard anything more about it. Mark and I still go camping sometimes, but never alone anymore, and never at Blackwood Trail. We've tried to find logical explanations for what happened. Maybe it was other hikers playing a cruel prank. Maybe we breathed some weird fungus spores that made us hallucinate. Maybe the isolation and darkness played tricks on our minds. But we both know what we heard. We both know what we saw in the moonlight. Those shadows that moved wrong. Those shapes at the tree line. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear those muffled voices again, arguing in words I can't quite understand. And I know I'll never go back to those woods alone. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Most don't believe it, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. The Rangers never found any evidence of other people being there that night. The slashes in our tent looked like they'd been made by a blade, but no other damage was found in the area. The only other strange detail came months later. I was looking through photos from previous camping trips and found one from that weekend. It was a simple shot of our campsite just after Wed set it up before sunset. The tent, the chairs, the fire pit, everything looked normal. Except in the background, barely visible between the trees, there was something I hadn't noticed when taking the picture. A tall, thin shadow that didn't match any of the trees. A shadow that seemed to be looking right at the camera. I deleted the photo immediately. Some things are better left unexamined. Some questions better left unanswered. But I still check my tent carefully every night before I go to sleep, looking for tears that shouldn't be there and listening for voices that shouldn't exist. The thing moved like a person, but wasn't one. I know that now. 3 weeks ago, when I first saw it shuffling down the east corridor of County General at 3 a.m., I told myself it was just another patient who'd wandered out of their room. But patients don't have legs that bend backward at the knees. They don't leave wet footprints that evaporate in seconds. And they definitely don't disappear through solid walls into wings that have been locked and abandoned for 20 years. I've worked security at County General for 8 years, on night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Nothing fancy, just me, my flashlight, and endless rounds through fluorescent-lit hallways. Check the doors, monitor the cameras, help lost visitors find the emergency room, deal with the occasional drunk or rowdy family member, write my reports, clock out, go home. Simple, until that first night. I was doing my 3 a.m. round, starting from the ground floor lobby and working my way up. Everything normal. Mrs. Chen at the front desk was doing her crossword puzzle. The ER was quiet, with just 2 patients being treated for minor injuries. The cafeteria was dark and locked. The gift shop's motion sensor light clicked on as I passed. 4th floor, psychiatric ward. All secure. 5th floor, maternity. Could hear a baby crying somewhere. 6th floor, oncology. The night nurse gave me a tired wave. 7th floor, mostly empty except for storage and some old administrative offices. Then the east corridor of the 8th floor. That's where things went wrong. I noticed the cold first. The heating system covers the whole building, but that hallway felt like a freezer. My breath came out in clouds. The fluorescent lights flickered, which wasn't unusual in the older sections of the hospital. What was unusual was the silence. Hospitals are never completely quiet, even at night. There's always some kind of background noise, ventilation systems, distant voices, equipment beeping, but this silence felt thick, like cotton in my ears. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet ahead, something moved. A figure, tall and thin, stood with its back to me. It wore what looked like a hospital gown, but dirty and torn. The head was bald. The skin was gray-white like old putty. "Hey," I called out. Hospital policy. Identify yourself first. Ask questions later. This area is restricted. You need to return to your room. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it started moving away from me toward the sealed double doors at the end of the corridor. Its walk was wrong. Each step looked painful, the legs bending in ways that made my stomach turn. I reached for my radio. "Front desk. This is Jim. Got a patient wandering on 8 East. Requesting backup." Static answered. I tried again. Nothing. The figure reached the double doors. The entrance to the old psychiatric wing had been closed down in 2003 after a fire. The doors were chained and padlocked. I had just checked those locks 20 minutes ago. Stop right there. I started walking faster, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. "You can go in there. It's dangerous." The figure paused. Slowly its head began to turn. Not its body, just the head, rotating much further than a human neck should allow. I caught a glimpse of its face. No eyes, just smooth gray skin, where eyes should be. A mouth that was too wide, filled with something that gleamed wet in my flashlight beam. My legs froze. Training kicked in, assessed the threat, maintained distance, call for backup, but my radio was still dead, and every instinct screamed at me to run. The thing's mouth opened. A sound came out, like wet meat being torn. Then it stepped backward through the solid metal doors and vanished. I stood there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding, sweat freezing on my skin despite the cold. Finally, I forced myself to walk to the doors. The chains were intact. The padlock was secure. No sign that anything had passed through, but on the floor a single wet footprint was slowly fading away. I ran all the way back to the security office on the ground floor. Mrs. Chen looked up from her crossword puzzle as I burst in. "Jim, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I caught my breath. "Did you get my radio call?" "What call?" "The radio's been working fine all night." I checked the security cameras for the 8th floor. Nothing. Just empty hallways. I pulled up the archived footage from 10 minutes ago. The timestamp showed me walking down the corridor, then stopping and standing still for almost 5 minutes, then running away. No figure in a hospital gown, no impossible creature, just me apparently losing my mind. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? I've worked security long enough to know how it goes. Tell people you saw something impossible, and suddenly you're not reliable anymore. Best case, they think you're making things up for attention. Worst case, they start wondering if you're stable enough to do your job. So I kept quiet, did my rounds, wrote my reports. But I started noticing things. The 8th floor got colder every night. Equipment started malfunctioning. Not just radios, but phones and cameras too. Always in that east corridor. Always around 3 a.m. A week after the first incident, I saw it again. This time on the 7th floor, dragging itself along the ceiling like a spider, leaving those wet footprints that vanished seconds later. I ran again. Checked the cameras again. Nothing. The third time was in the stairwell between 6 and 7. It was crouched in the corner, making that wet, tearing sound. When it saw me, it smiled. The smile went all the way up to where its eyes should have been. I started researching the hospital's history. The fire in the old psychiatric wing wasn't the only bad thing that happened there. In 1998, a patient named Michael Keene murdered 3 nurses and 2 other patients before killing himself. The official report said he used a stolen scalpel. Unofficial rumors said the bodies were found partially eaten. Keene had been tall and thin, bald from chemotherapy. The nurses' reports described him as unusually flexible, some kind of connective tissue disorder that let him contort his body in strange ways. I'm writing this now in the security office. It's 2:45 a.m. In 15 minutes I have to start my rounds. The temperature is already dropping. My radio is starting to crackle with static. Yesterday I found old blueprints of the 8th floor. Psychiatric wing isn't completely sealed off. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects it to the main building. According to the plans, it comes out in a storage closet on the 7th floor. The same closet where cleaning supplies keep going missing and where staff complains about strange sounds at night. I've been having dreams. In them, I'm walking through the old wing. The fire damage is still visible on the walls. There's something important I need to find there, something that was left behind when they sealed it off. In the dreams, I hear a wet tearing sound getting closer and closer, and I know somehow that what I've been seeing isn't Michael Keene. It's what he became, what was using his body even before he died. The night shift supervisor called me into his office yesterday, said I seemed distracted lately, asked if everything was okay at home, mentioned that other staff had noticed me talking to myself during rounds, and said maybe I should take some time off. I didn't tell him about the thing in the hallways, didn't tell him about the dreams or the blueprints or the research I'd been doing, just nodded and smiled and said I was fine, just not sleeping well. But I know what I have to do. Tonight, after my 3 a.m. round, I'm going into that maintenance tunnel. I need to see what's in the old wing, need to understand what this thing is and what it wants. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe the isolation and the long nights have finally broken something in my brain. Or maybe something hungry has been living in this hospital for 20 years, wearing the skin of a dead man, waiting for someone to notice it. And maybe it's been calling to me night after night, wanting me to follow it home. The temperature just dropped another 10 degrees. My coffee cup is vibrating on the desk. Static is getting louder on the radio. Time for my rounds. Update. 4:15 a.m. I found the maintenance tunnel. It was right where the blueprints showed it, behind a shelf of cleaning supplies. The lock was old and rusted. One hard pull and it broke off in my hand. The tunnel is narrow, with concrete walls and no lights. My flashlight beam only reaches about 10 feet ahead. The air smells like mold and something else. Something meat, sweet, and rotting. I can hear movement up ahead. Wet sounds. Breathing that's not quite breathing. The thing is waiting for me. I know that now. It's been waiting all along. My flashlight is starting to flicker. The battery was fresh when I started my shift. If anyone finds this, tell them I wasn't crazy. Tell them to seal up this tunnel and burn this whole place down if they have to. It's looking at me now. No eyes, but it's looking at me. That smile is getting wider. I think I finally understand what it wants. It's so hungry. And I followed it home. The dream started 3 months ago. Every night the same dark forest. Every night the same hooded figure watches me from between the trees. And now as I sit alone in my tent in the middle of nowhere, I know that what I feared most has finally happened. The thing from my dreams has crossed over into reality. I should have known better than to come on this camping trip. The signs were all there. But I need to write this down to record what happened in case someone finds this later. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 34, and I work as an IT consultant in Seattle. Nothing special about me. Nothing that should have drawn its attention. It began with what I thought was just a recurring nightmare. I'd wake up at exactly 3:17 a.m., my heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat, and the dream. I'd be walking through a dense forest. The trees were packed so tight you could barely squeeze between them. No trail, no markers, just endless trunks disappearing into darkness. And then I'd see it, always in the same spot, always standing perfectly still. A figure in a black hood, impossibly tall and thin. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in shadow. It never moved, never spoke, just watched. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. The dreams were so vivid that I'd wake up with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves in my nostrils. I tried everything to stop them: sleep medication, meditation, therapy. Dr. Roberts, my therapist, said it was just stress manifesting itself. Told me to take some time off work, maybe go somewhere with friends. Get out of your routine, she said. Do something fun and relaxing. That's how I ended up here on this camping trip with Mike and Steve. They'd been trying to get me to come hiking with them for years. When I finally said yes, they couldn't believe it. We drove 5 hours into the Cascade Mountains, following logging roads, until we couldn't drive any further. The plan was to hike to Fisher Lake, spend 3 days fishing and camping, then head back. The first day went fine. We set up camp about a half-mile from the lake in a small clearing. Mike brought his expensive tent. Steve had his old reliable Coleman, and I borrowed my brother's 2-person North Face. We grilled hot dogs, drank some beers, told stupid stories around the campfire. Normal stuff. I even started to relax a little. That night I slept without dreaming for the first time in months. When I woke up, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind in the trees, no sounds of Mike or Steve moving around camp. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The clearing was empty. Their tents were gone. The fire pit was cold and clean like it had never been used. Even their backpacks had vanished. My tent was the only sign that anyone had ever been here. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The screen showed 3:17 a.m. That's when I saw it standing at the edge of the clearing. The same hooded figure from my dreams, but this time I wasn't going to wake up. It was taller than any human could be, at least 8 feet. Its black robe hung in perfect stillness, even though I could feel a cold breeze on my face. The hood was pointed slightly down, aimed directly at me. I'm writing this now because I need to keep my hands busy. I need to focus on something other than the fact that it's still out there. I can see its shape through the tent wall, a darker shadow against the darkness. It hasn't moved in hours, just watching, waiting. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to make sense of this. Maybe I'm still dreaming. Maybe I had a mental breakdown and imagined the whole camping trip. Maybe Mike and Steve are playing some elaborate prank. But I know none of that is true. I know because I can smell that same wet earth and rotting leaves from my dreams, stronger than ever. I've checked my watch 12 times while writing this. It still says 3:17 a.m. It's been 3:17 a.m. for what feels like days now. Earlier I tried shouting for help. My voice seemed to die a few feet from my mouth, as if the air itself was dead. I tried running. Made it about 20 yards before realizing I was just running in circles, always ending up back at my tent, always with that figure standing in the exact same spot. The batteries in my flashlight are starting to die. The beam gets weaker every time I turn it on. I've been rationing my phone battery, but it's down to 12% now. I have 2 granola bars and half a bottle of water left. When those run out, the temperature keeps dropping. My sleeping bag isn't enough anymore. I can see my breath when I use the flashlight. The cold seems to be coming from the direction of the figure, like it's sucking all the warmth out of the air. I tried closing my eyes, counting to 10, doing all the things you're supposed to do when you think you're dreaming. Nothing works. Every time I open my eyes, it's still there, still watching. Sometimes I think I hear whispers coming from the woods. Not words exactly, more like the sound of dry leaves scraping against each other. But when I really focus on listening, there's nothing but that heavy, unnatural silence. I've started noticing details about the figure that I never saw in my dreams. The way its robe seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. How it's somehow perfectly black, darker than the darkness around it. And the slight tilt of its hood when I move, tracking my every motion. My hands are shaking so badly now that I can barely write, not just from the cold. A few minutes ago, or hours, or days. I can't tell anymore. I saw something move under its robe. Just for a second, like something long and thin was writhing underneath the fabric. I've been trying to remember if there were any warning signs before the dream started. Any reason why this thing chose me. But my life was completely normal. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, go to bed, repeat. The most exciting thing I did was order takeout from a different place every Friday. The only unusual thing was that day in the parking garage 3 months ago. I was walking to my car after work when I felt something watching me. Turned around and saw nothing but shadows between the concrete pillars. But for just a moment, I thought I saw something tall and dark move behind a column. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Now I know better. It was hunting me even then. The dreams weren't warnings. They were it teaching me to fear it, training me like a dog to recognize its master. My phone's down to 5% now. The flashlight batteries finally died. The darkness keeps pressing closer, thicker than any natural night should be. I can barely see what I'm writing anymore. I think it's getting closer. Every time I look up, it seems a few inches nearer to my tent. Moving so slowly I can actually see it move, but it's coming. The whispers are getting louder, still not words, but almost like they're just on the edge of making sense. I don't want to hear what they're trying to say. 4%. I have to make a decision soon. Either stay in this tent until I freeze, or starve or lose my mind. The temperature just dropped again. I can feel ice crystals forming on my sleeping bag. 2%. The figure is definitely closer now, close enough that I can see there's something wrong with its proportions. Arms too long, torso too narrow. Nothing human about it at all. 0%. I'm going to run, not in circles this time. Just pick a direction and go until I can't go anymore. Maybe that's what it wants. Maybe that's what it's been waiting for. If anyone finds this, tell my family I love them. Tell Mike and Steve I'm sorry. If you're reading this in the woods, run. Run before it starts appearing in your dreams too. The battery's almost dead. It's time. I can hear something scratching against the outside of my tent. The nylon wall is bulging inward like something's pressing against it. The whispers are getting louder. Almost words. Almost. I shouldn't have agreed to watch Mike's house. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in his kitchen at 3 a.m., gripping a knife and staring at the ceiling. The sound started 2 hours ago. First, the footsteps, then the banging. Now I'm trapped between fear and self-doubt, wondering if I'm losing my mind or if something is actually hunting me. It started normally enough. Mike asked me to watch his place while he took his family to Disney World for a week. Just check the mail, water the plants, make sure nobody breaks in, he said. Simple enough. I've known Mike since college, and his Victorian-style house always seemed nice if a bit old. Sure, it needed some work, peeling paint on the trim, a few loose boards on the porch, but nothing scary. The first 2 days went fine. I'd stop by after work, bring in any packages, water his wife's herb garden, and check that all the doors and windows were locked. I even cleaned out their fridge so nothing would spoil while they were gone. Normal house-sitting stuff. Tonight was different. I decided to stay over since tomorrow is Saturday and I didn't have work. Mike said I could use the guest room whenever I wanted. I brought my laptop, planning to watch some movies and relax. Around 1 a.m. I was about to head up to bed when I heard it, footsteps in the attic. At first I tried to ignore them. Old houses make noise. That's what Mike always said whenever I commented on the creaks and groans during our game nights. But these weren't just random creaks. The footsteps moved with purpose, crossing from one end of the attic to the other, then back again. Heavy steps, like someone wearing boots. I froze in the living room, my heart pounding against my ribs. The TV was still playing some sitcom, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. All I could do was track those footsteps as they paced overhead, back and forth, My hands started shaking. Sweat broke out on my forehead. I grabbed my phone, pulled up Mike's number, then stopped. What would I say? Hey, I know you're at Disney World, but I think someone's walking around in your attic at 1 a.m. You'd think I was crazy. The footsteps stopped. The silence felt worse somehow. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. The house's heating system kicked in with a clunk that made me jump. My phone slipped from my sweaty fingers and clattered on the hardwood floor. That's when the banging started in the garage. Thud, thud, loud, deliberate impacts that shook the connecting wall between the garage and the house. It sounded like someone hitting the wall with something heavy. A sledgehammer maybe, or a piece of lumber. I snatched up my phone and retreated to the kitchen. It had the best lighting and the most weapons. Knives, heavy pans, anything I could use to defend myself. My fingers trembled as I pulled up the local police department's number. But again, I hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if I called the cops and they found out it was just the house settling or some raccoons in the garage? I'd look like an idiot, and Mike would never trust me to watch his place again. The banging stopped as suddenly as it began. New sounds filtered in. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing on the street outside, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Normal sounds that somehow made everything worse. I grabbed the biggest knife from the butcher block and leaned against the kitchen counter facing the door to the garage. My shirt was soaked with sweat sticking to my back. Every few seconds, I had to adjust my grip on the knife handle because my palms were so wet. The garage door connecting to the kitchen had a small window in it, covered by a thin curtain. As I watched, a shadow passed behind it, just a quick movement, there and gone, but unmistakable. Someone was in the garage. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I just stood there, knife raised, staring at that little window. The curtain fluttered slightly, like someone had brushed against it from the other side. I should run. I should get out of here right now, jump in my car and drive away. But my legs wouldn't move. And what if someone was waiting outside? What if there were more than one person? The footsteps in the attic started again, louder this time. They moved faster, more purposefully, heading toward the attic stairs that led down to the second floor. I heard the distinct sound of the attic door opening. Its hinges squealed. My body finally unfroze. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt. Behind me, heavy footsteps descended the attic stairs. The garage door handle started to turn. The deadbolt wouldn't budge. I locked it earlier, I was sure of it, but now it seemed stuck. I yanked harder, my fingers slipping on the metal. The footsteps reached the second floor hallway. The garage door began to open. With a final desperate twist, the deadbolt shot back. I yanked the door open and ran outside into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked at the curb. My hand shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before managing to unlock the door. As I slid behind the wheel, I looked back at the house. All the lights I'd left on were now off. Every window was dark, but there in the attic window, I saw a face, just for a second, illuminated by the streetlights. It wasn't human. I started the car and floored it, tires squealing against the pavement. In my rearview mirror, I watched Mike's house disappear into the darkness. My phone started ringing. It was Mike. I let it go to voicemail. What could I tell him? That his house was haunted, that something with a twisted, elongated face was living in his attic, that I'd abandoned my post and run away like a coward. The phone rang again. Still Mike. This time I answered. Hey, what's up? I tried to keep my voice steady. Are you okay? Mike's voice sounded strange, tight with tension. The security system just sent me an alert. All the motion sensors are going crazy. My stomach dropped. Motion sensors. You never mentioned any motion sensors. They're new, I had them installed last week after... He paused. After what happened to the last house sitter. What happened to the last house sitter? My voice cracked. Look, just get out of there if you haven't already. Don't go in the attic. Don't open the garage. I'm calling the police. I'm already gone. I said, I'm in my car. Mike, what's going on? What's in your house? He was quiet for so long. I thought the call had dropped when he finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. We bought the house 2 years ago. Everything was fine at first. Then people started seeing things, hearing things. The first house sitter disappeared. The police found her car in the garage, but no sign of her. We tried to sell, but no one would buy it. That's why we're at Disney World. We're not coming back. I'm sorry. I should have told you. Why did you let me stay there? Why did you ask me to watch it? Another long pause. Because it never bothers the owners. Only visitors. Only people who stay overnight. I thought if someone was there watching the place, maybe nothing bad would happen while we're gone. Maybe it would stay quiet. Well, it didn't, I said. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. It's definitely not quiet. Where are you now? I looked around. In my panic, I'd driven aimlessly. I was on some dark back roads surrounded by trees. I don't know exactly, but I'm far from your house. Good. Stay far away. You'll call the police. Have them check it out. Just don't go back there. Not even during the day. Promise me. Trust me. I won't. I ended the call and pulled over to the side of the road. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty pavement ahead. Behind me, miles back now, something waited in Mike's house. Something that paced in the attic and banged on walls and had a face that wasn't human. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Police are on their way. They'll call you for a statement. I'm so sorry. I started driving again, heading for my apartment. The sun would be up in a few hours. Maybe in the daylight, this would all seem like a bad dream. But I knew better. The weight of the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I'd seen something tonight that shouldn't exist. Something that had already made one person disappear. As I drove, I couldn't shake the image of that face in the attic window. The way its features seemed to shift and stretch in the streetlight. The way it smiled when it saw me running. I also couldn't shake the guilt. Not about running away. Anyone would have run from that thing. No, I felt guilty about the next person. Because there would be a next person. The house would sit empty for a while, but eventually someone would buy it. Some family would move in, thinking they'd found their dream home, and then they'd hear the footsteps in the attic. The police were called an hour later. I told them everything, knowing they wouldn't believe me. They didn't. They searched the house, finding nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been there besides me. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard, and I know that somewhere in Mike's old Victorian house, something is waiting, pacing in the attic, banging on walls, watching through windows, with its inhuman face, waiting for the next visitor, the next person to stay overnight, the next person to disappear. I've started researching the house's history, missing persons reports going back decades, previous owners who moved out suddenly, leaving everything behind, stories of strange sounds and faces in windows. Mike won't answer my calls anymore. His family never returned from Disney World. The house sits empty. Its windows are dark. Its secrets are locked inside. Sometimes late at night I think about driving past it, just to see if I can spot that face in the attic window again. Just to prove to myself that it was real. But I can't. Because deep down I know it would see me too. And this time it might not let me run away. The first time I heard the piano, I thought I was dreaming. 3 notes sharp and clear pierced through my sleep at 3:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the moment I sat up in bed. My heart pounded against my ribs. The sound came from the basement of my new house, a place I'd only been twice since moving in 3 weeks ago. I bought this house in suburban Michigan because it was cheap, and because after my divorce, I needed to start over somewhere quiet. The realtor mentioned the previous owner had left some furniture behind, including an old upright piano in the basement. I didn't think much of it at the time. I don't play piano, and the thing looked unplayable anyway. Yellowed keys, rust on the strings. I could see through the open top panel and a thick layer of dust everywhere. That first night I lay in bed for 20 minutes after the sound stopped, telling myself it was just the house settling or maybe a mouse walking across the keys. But mice don't play 3 distinct notes in sequence. When I finally got up the nerve to check my bare feet silent on the wooden stairs, the basement was exactly as I'd left it. The piano sat against the far wall. Its wooden surface reflected the weak light from my flashlight. I pressed one of the keys. It made a dull thunk. No musical tone at all. I didn't sleep well that night, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Moving to a new house alone can do things to your mind. I spent the next day unpacking boxes in my home office, trying to make the place feel more like mine. I barely thought about the piano until 3:17 a.m. The next night, this time 5 notes forming the beginning of what sounded like a melody. I sat up immediately, fully awake, with sweat already forming on my forehead despite the cool autumn air coming through my window. The sound was crisp and clear, not the work of a broken piano. I grabbed my phone and started recording before heading downstairs. My hands shook as I opened the basement door. The music stopped the instant my foot touched the first step. When I reached the bottom, everything was exactly the same as before. The piano looked dead and silent, covered in dust without a single fingerprint on its surface. I played the recording back. Nothing. Just the sound of my breathing and footsteps. This pattern continued for 2 weeks. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. the piano would play. Sometimes just a few notes, sometimes entire fragments of melodies I didn't recognize. Classical pieces maybe, but nothing I could identify. Each time I went to investigate, the music would stop before I reached the basement. Each time the piano showed no signs of being touched. I started sleeping less. Dark circles formed under my eyes. My coworkers on Zoom calls asked if I was feeling okay. I told them I was still adjusting to the new house in a way that was true. I tried setting up a camera in the basement. The footage showed nothing, just a dark, empty room with a dusty piano. But every night I heard the music. Every night it got a little longer, a little more complex. After the 3rd week, I called the realtor. I needed to know more about the previous owner. "Let me check the records," she said. I could hear her typing. "Oh, yes, Mr. Harrison. An elderly gentleman who lived there for 40 years. Died in his sleep about 6 months ago. His kids sold the house as is. Didn't want to deal with clearing everything out." "Why do you ask? Did he play piano?" "You know, I'm not sure. The family didn't mention it, but they did say he was very insistent about leaving the piano in the basement. It was in his will, apparently. Odd request, now that I think about it." That night, I waited in my bed for 3:17 a.m. The music started right on schedule, but this time it was different. Not just a few notes or a short melody. It was a full piece, played with the skill of someone who had spent decades mastering the instrument. The sound filled the house, rising through the floorboards and vibrating in my chest. I didn't move. I lay there rigid, listening to every note. The piece lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than ever. My phone showed 3:24 a.m. when I finally got up. Each step down to the basement felt like moving through thick syrup. The air got colder as I descended. When I reached the bottom step, I noticed something different. The piano's lid was open. I approached slowly, my flashlight beam steady on the dusty keys. No fingerprints, no disturbance in the dust. But as I leaned in closer, I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the strings, thick with rust just yesterday, now gleamed like new in my flashlight beam. The next day I called in sick to work and spent hours researching the house's history. County records showed nothing unusual. Mr. Harrison had bought the place in 1980, lived there quietly, and died in his sleep this past spring. No criminal records, no strange incidents, just a normal elderly man in a normal suburban house. I found his obituary online. The photo showed a thin man with kind eyes and white hair, wearing a cardigan and sitting in what looked like a living room. Not my living room, but somewhere else. The article mentioned he was survived by 2 children and 5 grandchildren. It said nothing about music, but at the bottom there was a line that made me freeze. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations be made to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, where Mr. Harrison served as principal pianist for 30 years. That night, I set up my phone to record again. I sat in the basement, back against the cold concrete wall, waiting. The dust on the piano keys looked undisturbed in the beam of my flashlight. 3:16 a.m. My hands were sweating, despite the basement's chill. 4:17 a.m. The first note made me jump, even though I was expecting it. The sound didn't come from where I was looking. It seemed to come from inside the piano itself, as if the strings were vibrating without the hammers touching them. More notes followed, building into a complex piece I didn't recognize. I watched the keys move by themselves, each one dipping slightly and rising again as the music played. No dust disturbed, no visible mechanism at work, just music flowing out of a dead piano. The piece lasted exactly 7 minutes again. When it ended, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to my own breathing. Finally, I played back the recording on my phone. Nothing, just basement silence and the occasional creak of the house above. I started sleeping in the basement after that. I brought down a camping cot, a sleeping bag, and a small lamp. Every night at 3:17 a.m. the music would play. Every night it was the same piece. Why something complex and beautiful that I couldn't identify? Every morning, I'd wake up to find another piano string cleaned of rust, gleaming like new in my flashlight beam. After a week of sleeping in the basement, I noticed the keys were starting to whiten, the old yellowed ivory slowly returning to its original color. The wood of the piano began to shine in places, as if someone was carefully, gradually restoring it inch by inch. I tried playing the piano during the day. The keys still made dull thunking sounds. No music at all, but each night it produced perfect, crystal clear tones. I found Mr. Harrison's son's phone number through some online searching. When he answered, I could hear children playing in the background. "Yes, that was Dad's piano," he said when I asked. "He played it every single day for as long as I can remember. Even after he retired from the symphony, he practiced for hours. Mom used to joke that he loved that piano more than her. Do you know why he wanted it left in the basement?" A pause. He got sick near the end. Arthritis in his hands. Couldn't play anymore. It broke his heart. He had the piano moved to the basement because he couldn't bear to see it every day, knowing he'd never play it again. But he wouldn't sell it. Said it still had music in it. I didn't tell him about the nightly concerts. Instead, I asked, what time did he usually practice? Early morning, before anyone else was awake. He said that's when the music was clearest. Mom said he'd get up at 3:00 or 3:15, most days. Crazy old man. He laughed softly. Why do you ask? I thanked him and hung up. That night I did something different. At 3:16 a.m., I sat down at the piano bench. The wood felt cold through my pajama pants. I placed my hands on the keys, feeling the smooth ivory under my fingertips. Some of the keys were still yellowed, but others had returned to a pristine white. 3:17 a.m. The music started, but this time I could feel it through my hands. Each key moved under my fingers, guiding them. I wasn't playing. Something else was moving my hands, pressing each key with precision and skill that I didn't possess. The music flowed through me, using me as a conduit. 7 minutes later, when the piece ended, my hands were shaking. I looked down at the keys, where my fingers had touched. The ivory was completely restored, white and perfect. 3 more strings gleamed like new in the darkness inside the piano. The next night, I sat at the bench again. The same thing happened. My hands moved with the music and more of the piano restored itself. Night after night, the process continued. Each time I felt less like I was being guided and more like I was learning, remembering something I'd never known. After a month, the piano was completely restored. Every key gleamed white in my flashlight beam. Every string shone like new, and the wood glowed with a rich, deep polish. During the day, I found I could play simple tunes. Nothing like the complex pieces that filled the night, but actual music instead of dull thuds. Last night, I sat at the bench at 3:16 a.m., as usual, but when 3:17 came, there was only silence. I waited, hands on the keys, but no ghostly force moved my fingers. Instead, I felt an urge, a memory that wasn't mine, and I began to play. The piece flowed out of me as if I'd known it all my life. My fingers moved across the keys with confidence and skill, drawing forth the same complex melody I'd heard every night for the past month. 7 minutes later, when the final note faded, I sat in the darkness, listening to the silence. I understood then what Mr. Harrison meant about the piano, still having music in it. He poured 40 years of his life into those keys, those strings. All those early mornings, all that passion and dedication, he couldn't just disappear. This morning, I looked up piano teachers in the area. I have my first lesson next week. After all, I have a lot of practicing to do. The piano is fully restored now, but it still needs someone to play it. And every morning I wake up at 3:17 a.m., sit down at the bench, and play the piece Mr. Harrison taught me, note by note, in the quiet hours before dawn. I didn't notice it the first night. Moving into a new place overwhelms your senses. The unfamiliar creaks, the different airflow, the way sound bounces off bare walls. But by the second night, there was no ignoring it. A thick, heavy smell crept under my door around 3 a.m. like rotting meat left too long in a hot dumpster. I had just moved to Philadelphia from Chicago after my divorce. The apartment was all I could afford on short notice. A studio on the 5th floor of an old brick building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The rent was cheap, and I needed cheap. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, had barely looked at my application before handing over the keys. "Just don't make noise after 10 p.m., he said, his eyes never meeting mine. That second night, the smell woke me from a dead sleep. My throat closed up and I gagged, stumbling to the window to gulp in some fresh air. The smell filled every corner of the small space. Dense, organic. Wrong. I checked the mini fridge, the garbage can, under the sink. Nothing. By sunrise it had disappeared completely, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. The next night it came back stronger. I stuffed a towel under my door, but it seeped through anyway. The smell wasn't coming from the hallway. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. My eyes watered and my stomach churned. Around 4 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps in the ceiling above me. Slow, deliberate steps moving back and forth. I knew that was impossible. I lived on the top floor. The footsteps continued for exactly 47 minutes. I know because I sat rigid in my bed watching the clock on my phone, too terrified to move. When they finally stopped, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. By morning, both the smell and the footsteps were gone. I went to work at the garage where I'd found a job as a mechanic, exhausted and jumpy. That evening I asked my neighbor across the hall, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, if she'd noticed any strange smells. "I work nights," she said flatly. "I'm never here after dark." She shut her door before I could ask anything else. The pattern continued. Each night the smell grew stronger and the footsteps more numerous. They weren't just pacing anymore. They moved with purpose, following specific paths across my ceiling. Sometimes they'd stop directly above my bed, and I'd lie there barely breathing, waiting for something to crash through. After a week, I started sleeping at a 24-hour diner down the street. The waitress, Rita, kept my coffee cup full and didn't ask questions when I dozed in the booth. But I couldn't avoid my apartment forever. My savings were dwindling, and I needed real sleep. The next night, I forced myself to stay. The smell came right on schedule, thick enough to make my eyes water. The footsteps started at 3:17 a.m. But this time there was something new, a scraping sound like fingernails dragging across the ceiling. I grabbed my phone and recorded the sound. The recording picked up the footsteps clearly, but when I played it back the next morning, the audio was distorted by a low, constant hum I hadn't heard in person. I went to the building manager's office. Mr. Peterson wasn't there, but his assistant, a skinny kid with acne, was... "The top floor?" he said when I described the footsteps. "That's impossible. There's just a maintenance crawl space up there. No one goes up there. Can I see it?" He shook his head. "It's locked. Building code. Only Mr. Peterson has the key." I waited 3 days to catch Mr. Peterson. When I finally cornered him in the lobby, he listened to my story with an expression I couldn't read. "The previous tenant complained about similar things," he said slowly. "She moved out after 2 weeks. Why didn't you tell me?" He shrugged. "She was unstable, had problems. We get all types here." That night the smell was different. Sharper, more metallic. The footsteps came earlier, around 2 a.m. They moved faster, more agitated. The scraping turned into pounding, like something was trying to break through. I called the police. They arrived at 3:45 a.m. 2 board officers who clearly thought I was drunk or high. By then the sounds had stopped. "We can hear anything, sir," the female officer said, "and we don't smell anything unusual." "It was here," I insisted. I recorded it, I played them the audio, but now all it captured was static. They left after writing a report that I knew would go nowhere. I sat on my bed until sunrise, jumping at every creak and settling of the old building. The next day I went to the public library and researched the building's history. It was built in 1922, originally as a hotel. In 1956, it was converted to apartments. There were the usual stories of deaths over the years, elderly residents passing in their sleep, a suicide in 1978, a drug overdose in 1995. Nothing that explained what was happening. But then I found an article from 1987 about a maintenance worker who disappeared. The police suspected he'd stolen from several apartments and run off, but they never found him. His name was Gerald Morton, and he worked in the building for 23 years. That night I waited. The smell came at 2:45 a.m. Rot and copper and something else I couldn't identify. The footsteps followed at 3:02 a.m. directly above my bed. Then the scraping started, but it wasn't on the ceiling anymore. It was coming from inside the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and pressed my ear against the wall. The scraping moved downward, getting louder. Something was in there, moving through the space between the walls. The maintenance crawl space. It had to connect to the wall somehow. I ran to the hallway. The scraping was inside the hallway walls now, moving toward the maintenance door at the end of the corridor. My hands shook as I approached the door. It was locked, just like the assistant had said, but the lock looked old. I ran back to my apartment and grabbed my tools. 5 minutes later, I was picking the lock with a tension wrench and rake pick I used for working on old cars. The lock clicked open. The smell hit me like a physical force. My eyes burned and I gagged, but I forced myself to shine a flashlight inside. A narrow ladder led up into darkness. The scraping sound echoed from above. I climbed. The crawl space was tight, barely 4 feet high. I had to crouch, moving my flashlight beam across decades of dust. There were pathways in the dust, like something had been walking up here recently. The beam caught something in the corner, a pile of cloth. No, work clothes. They were stained dark, and when I got closer, I saw the name tag, Gerald. The scraping sound came from behind me. I spun around. A figure crouched in the darkness. It wore what remained of a maintenance uniform, but the fabric was rotted and hung from a frame that was too long and too thin. Its hands ended in yellowed curved nails that had grown into claws. The head turned toward me, but where the face should have been, there was only dark leathery skin stretched tight over bone. I ran. I don't remember climbing down the ladder or running to my car. I drove until sunrise, until I was 2 states away. I never went back to the apartment. I left everything there, my clothes, my furniture, all of it. I called Mr. Peterson once from a burner phone and told him to keep my security deposit. He said, "You'd last longer than the others," and hung up. I live in Arizona now. My new apartment is on the first floor of a new building. There are no crawl spaces, no maintenance doors, no unexplained sounds at night. But sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m., I swear I can smell something for a second, like rotting meat and copper and dust. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but I know what I saw in that crawl space. And I know that somewhere in Philadelphia, in an old brick building with too many empty apartments, something is still walking across the ceiling every night, scraping at the walls, waiting for the next tenant who needs a cheap place to live. I know because I check the building's rental listings every few months. The turnover is constant. No one stays more than a few weeks and the rent keeps getting cheaper. Mr. Peterson is still there, still managing the building, still not meeting anyone's eyes when he hands over the keys, still not telling new tenants about the smell, or the footsteps, or what lives in the crawl space above their heads. Sometimes I think about calling the police or a newspaper, or someone who might investigate, but what would I say? That a maintenance man who disappeared in 1987 never left the building, that he's still up there changed into something that isn't human anymore. They'd never believe me. I wouldn't believe me if I hadn't seen it myself. So I stay in Arizona in my first floor apartment with its new walls and bright lights. I keep my tools nearby just in case. And every night at 3 a.m., I lie awake and listen, making sure the only footsteps I hear are from the living tenants above me. But sometimes in my dreams, I'm back in that crawl space. The beam of my flashlight catches movement in the corner. Something turns to look at me with a face that isn't a face. And just before I wake up screaming, I hear the scraping of long nails on the inside of the walls, getting closer and closer, following me even here. I wake up covered in sweat, gasping for air. I check the walls, the ceiling, under the door. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. But I know the truth. In that old building in Philadelphia, something is still walking across the ceiling every night, still scraping at the walls, still waiting. The rent keeps getting cheaper. A security camera notification lit up my phone at 2:47 a.m. Someone was standing in my front yard, motionless, staring directly at my house. I wish I had never checked that alert. My throat felt like sandpaper when I woke up that night. The usual glass of water I keep by my bed was empty. I must have drunk it earlier without remembering. The house was dead quiet except for the low hum of the AC. My wife Sarah breathed steadily next to me, lost in sleep. I grabbed my phone to check the time, 2:45 a.m. The screen's brightness made me squint. 2 minutes later, while I was still trying to convince myself to get up and go downstairs for water, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. A motion detection alert popped up, and I clicked it without thinking much. We get these alerts all the time, usually just cats wandering through the yard or tree branches moving in the wind. The app opened to a live feed from the camera mounted above our front porch. My finger froze on the screen as a tall figure stood perfectly still in the middle of our front yard, about 20 feet from the house, adult height, wearing what looked like dark clothes. The infrared night vision made everything greenish and grainy, but I could tell they were facing directly toward our front door, just standing there, not moving at all. My chest got tight. I sat up in bed suddenly wide awake, watching the feed for 30 seconds, waiting for the person to move or leave. They didn't budge an inch. "Sarah," I whispered, reaching over to shake her shoulder. She didn't wake up. I tried again louder. "Sarah." She mumbled something and rolled over, the medication she takes for her insomnia knocking her out cold. I looked back at my phone. The figure was still there, in the exact same position. I got out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. The house felt different at this hour. Familiar shapes turned strange in the darkness. I went to our bedroom window, which overlooks the front yard and streetlight on the corner. Everything looked normal. No one was there. I checked my phone again. The figure was still visible on the camera feed, standing in the exact same spot. But when I looked out the window, nothing was there. I had to check. I had to know what was going on. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and grabbed the baseball bat we keep in the closet. The smooth wood felt reassuring in my grip. Our bedroom is on the second floor. I crept down the stairs, stepping over the third step from the bottom that always creaks. The first floor was dark, except for the dim blue light from our router in the living room. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. The yard looked empty, just like from the window. I pulled out my phone again. The figure was still there on the camera feed, standing in the exact same position. My heart pounded against my ribs. I flipped on the porch light. The sudden brightness made me blink through the peephole. I could see our entire front yard illuminated, still empty. My palms were sweating on the baseball bat as I unlocked the deadbolt, and then the doorknob. The door opened with a soft click. Cool night air hitting my face. Crickets chirped in the bushes. A car passed on the main road a block away, its engine sound rising and fading. I stepped onto the porch. Bab ready, the yard was empty. I walked to the exact spot where the figure appeared to be standing in the camera feed. The grass was dry and crisp under my feet. Nothing looked disturbed. I checked my phone again. The figure was there, supposedly right where I was standing, but there was nothing. I waved my hand through the air in front of me. Nothing. The back of my neck prickled. I spun around to look at the house, the porch light casting my shadow long across the lawn. The security camera was just visible, mounted under the eaves above the porch. Its small red light blinked steadily. I walked back to the porch and looked up at the camera. Everything seemed normal. No obvious signs of tampering. I opened the security app again, and my stomach dropped. The figure was gone. I scrolled back through the footage. The figure appeared at exactly 2:47 a.m., standing motionless at 3:12 a.m., about 30 seconds ago. It simply vanished. No walking away, no blur of movement. There one frame gone, the next. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I went back inside, locked the door, and double-checked all the first-floor windows. Everything was secure. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, baseball bat across my lap, watching the security feed. Nothing else appeared. The next morning, I checked the camera thoroughly. No signs of hacking or tampering. The footage was still there. A dark figure standing motionless in my yard for exactly 25 minutes, then vanishing into thin air. I didn't tell Sarah. What would I say? That our security camera caught a ghost? That I was losing my mind? I deleted the footage and tried to forget about it, but every night since then, I wake up around 2:45 a.m. Consider adding more context or rephrasing it for smoother flow. Here's the revised text. Proofread the following text. I still have nightmares about those black spheres staring in at me through my car window. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing as if I'm reliving that night all over again. The next day, I went back to that Shell station with a police officer. The attendant working the night before said no one matching that description had been there. They checked the security cameras, and the footage showed me pulling out, pumping gas, and driving away. No sign of anyone approaching me or any other people at all. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I think about what might have happened if I'd given him a ride from that gas station. Part of me is afraid that if I start talking about it, I'll see him again. Not just in my nightmares, but standing outside my house at night, those black spheres staring in through my windows. The case is still open, and sometimes I think about going to them, telling them everything I saw, but I know how it would sound. They'd think I'm either drunk or had fallen asleep at the wheel. I don't drive at night anymore if I can help it, but if you do, watch out for mile marker 43. And if you see someone standing in the road wearing a green canvas jacket, don't stop, just drive as fast as you can. and pray he doesn't appear at your window, because I'm starting to think that whatever is wearing that green canvas jacket now isn't the man from the missing persons poster anymore. I should have known something was wrong when I saw no other cars in the parking lot, but after 14 hours on the road, my mind wasn't working right. I just needed food, coffee, and a break from the endless highway stretching between Phoenix and Dallas. The neon sign buzzed above the small roadside diner, casting a red glow across my windshield. Mary's Place open 24 hours, it proclaimed in flickering letters. The building sat alone on that empty stretch of desert highway, a single-story rectangle of tan concrete with large windows running along the front. I pulled my Toyota Camry into the gravel lot at 3:47 a.m., and the crunch of tires on loose stones seemed too loud in the dead silence of the night. No crickets chirped, no wind blew. It was just the quiet hum of my engine before I turned the key and killed it. My legs cramped as I stepped out of the car, and the air felt thick and stagnant like breathing through a wet cloth. Sweat immediately beaded on my forehead, despite the late-hour summer nights in New Mexico didn't offer much relief from the heat. A bell jingled as I pushed open the glass door, and cold air conditioning hit my face. A welcome change from the muggy night outside. The diner looked like dozens of others I'd stopped at over the years. Red vinyl booths along the windows, a counter with chrome stools, laminated menus tucked behind metal napkin holders. Everything was clean but worn around the edges, the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same for the past 30 years. "Sit anywhere you like." "Hun," the waitress appeared from the kitchen, coffee pot in hand. She looked to be in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a loose bun and tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read Helen. I slid into a booth by the window, my clothes sticking to the vinyl. Helen set a menu in front of me and filled a white ceramic mug with coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. "Rough night for driving," she said, though her tone was more statement than conversation starter. "Yeah, long haul from Phoenix. Still got a ways to go to Dallas." I wrapped my hands around the hot mug, letting it warm my air-conditioned fingers. She nodded, then stood waiting with her order pad. I hadn't even opened the menu, but suddenly realized I was starving. "Burger and fries?" I asked. It seemed safe, hard to mess up diner standards. "Good choice, cook makes them fresh." She scribbled on her pad and headed back to the kitchen without another word. I sipped the coffee and stared out the window at my car. The only vehicle in sight, the highway stretched empty in both directions, disappearing into darkness. I've reviewed the text and found no major issues with grammar, punctuation, or flow. The writing is descriptive and engaging, and the story is well structured. Here are some minor suggestions to improve the text. In the first paragraph, consider adding a space between sentences to make them easier to read. In the second paragraph, you might want to specify what minor flow issues means in this context. It's unclear whether it refers to sentence structure, paragraph organization, or something else. The rest of the text is clear and well written. There are no obvious errors in grammar, punctuation, or spelling. In terms of content, the story is interesting and has a good pace. You've done a great job of creating tension and suspense as the protagonist encounters strange occurrences related to the watch. I heard a loud mechanical ring echoing up from the basement at first. I thought I was imagining things. I took off my headphones and listened there. It was again, that distinctive old-fashioned telephone ring, slightly muffled but unmistakable. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at my dark office doorway as the ringing continued. "This is impossible," I muttered to myself. "That line's been dead for years." The ringing persisted, mechanical and insistent. After the fifth ring, I got up from my desk and walked to the basement door. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. Something about this felt wrong, but my rational mind kicked in, probably just some weird electrical issue, causing the old ringer to malfunction. I should check it out before it kept me up all night. I flipped on the basement lights and walked down the creaking wooden stairs. The ringing grew louder with each step. When I reached the concrete floor, I could see the black phone on its shelf, exactly where it had been sitting untouched for months. The ring was definitely coming from it. I approached slowly, watching the phone like it might suddenly sprout legs and scuttle away. The dust on the shelf around it was undisturbed. The coiled cord hung limply down the side. Ring after ring continued to echo off the stone foundation walls. "This is crazy," I said aloud, trying to steady my nerves with the sound of my own voice. "It's not even connected to anything." I reached for the receiver, hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. The ringing stopped immediately. I held the heavy black handset to my ear. "Hello." There was no dial tone, no static, No automated message, just silence. At first, then I heard it, the sound of someone breathing, slow, deliberate breaths, clearly audible through the receiver. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shakier than I intended. The breathing continued, steady and unchanging. I slammed the receiver back into its cradle. My hands were trembling slightly. I backed away from the shelf, keeping my eyes on the phone. It sat there innocently, just an old piece of obsolete technology. I practically ran up the basement stairs, slamming the door behind me. Back in my office, I tried to focus on work again, but I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes I found myself glancing at the basement door, half expecting to hear that ring again. Nothing happened for the rest of the night. Around 2 a.m., I finally gave up on work and went to bed. I lay awake for hours, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing, sleep deprivation, and too much coffee playing tricks on my mind. Still, I avoided the basement for the next few days. By Friday, I had almost put the incident out of my mind. I needed to do laundry, so I forced myself to go down to the basement in the middle of the afternoon. Bright sunlight streamed through the small ground-level windows. The phone sat exactly as it always had, covered in dust. Out of curiosity, I picked up the receiver and held it to my ear. Complete silence. Wait, not even the hum of a dial tone. I set it back down and examined the phone more closely. The cord disappeared behind the shelf, but when I pulled it out, I could see it had been cut off about 6 inches from where it entered the phone base. This thing wasn't connected to anything. I seriously considered throwing it away right then, but something stopped me. Maybe just my natural tendency to procrastinate on household chores. I left it there and went about my laundry. That night, it rang again. Same time, 11:30 p.m. exactly. I was in bed reading when I heard it start. The ring sounded different from upstairs. Hollower, more distant, but still clearly audible through the floor. I put down my book and sat perfectly still, listening. Ring after ring echoed up from below. My heart was pounding in my chest. This time I knew I wasn't imagining it. The logical part of my brain started running through explanations. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank, but how the phone wasn't connected to anything? Could it be picking up interference from something else? But what could make an old rotary phone ring without power? The ringing continued, demanding an answer. I got out of bed and walked downstairs to my office, through the basement door. I could hear it more clearly now. I stood there for several minutes, debating what to do. Finally, I opened the door. The basement lights were off, and the ringing seemed to echo up the dark stairwell. I flipped the switch and walked down, my bare feet cold on the wooden steps. The phone looked exactly the same as always. I approached it slowly, watching the dust motes dance in the air around it, stirred up by my movement. The ringing stopped as soon as my hand touched the receiver. I lifted it to my ear. "Hello?" The breathing started immediately, slow, steady breaths, perfectly regular. In, out, out. This time I forced myself to listen more carefully. The sound had an odd quality to it, not quite natural, almost like it was coming from very far away or through some kind of filter. "Who are you?" I asked. "What do you want?" The breathing continued unchanged. I stood there listening for several minutes, but nothing changed. Finally, I set the receiver down gently. Upstairs, I grabbed my phone and called my friend Mike, who works in IT security. It was late, but I knew he'd still be up. "Hey man, weird question. Is there any way someone could hack an old rotary phone to make it ring like remotely?" "What? No, that's not really possible. Those old phones are completely mechanical. They need a physical connection to the phone line to do anything." Why I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. "Okay, either you're messing with me or someone else is messing with you." He said finally, "There's literally no way that phone could ring without being connected to a line. Physics doesn't work that way. I know how it sounds, but I swear it's happening. Look, want me to come check it out tomorrow? I can bring some equipment, see if there's any weird electromagnetic activity or something." I agreed immediately. Having another person investigate would help prove I wasn't going crazy. Mike came over the next afternoon with a duffel bag full of testing equipment. He examined the phone thoroughly, confirming that it wasn't connected to anything. He tested for electromagnetic fields, radio frequencies, and a bunch of other things I didn't understand. Everything came up normal. This is just an ordinary old phone. He concluded, probably worth something to a collector, but it's completely inert. No power, no connection. Nothing unusual at all. So how do you explain what's happening? He shrugged. Bad dreams, stress hallucinations, or maybe someone installed some kind of hidden speaker to mess with you. Want me to stay tonight and see if anything happens? I agreed eagerly. Mike set up his laptop and some monitoring equipment. We waited. 11:30 p.m. came and went. Nothing happened. See, probably just your imagination, Mike said. Around midnight, he packed up his gear and left. I went to bed frustrated and confused. Was I really just imagining things? But it had seemed so real. The phone stayed silent for the next 3 nights. I was just starting to relax when it happened again. This time it was 3:17 a.m. when the ringing jolted me awake. I sat up in bed instantly alert. The sound seemed louder than before, more urgent somehow. I got up and walked downstairs, not bothering with lights this time. The ringing guided me through the darkness. When I reached the basements, pale moonlight filtered through the windows, casting strange shadows on the walls. The phone was ringing frantically now, the bells seeming to vibrate through my entire body. I crossed the room quickly and grabbed the receiver. The breathing was different this time, faster, more irregular. I could hear something else in the background, a faint scratching sound, like nails on wood. "What do you want?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The breathing quickened further, the scratching grew louder, and for the first time I heard something else. A voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Help," it whispered. The voice was raspy, desperate. "Please help. Who are you? How can I help?" The scratching sound intensified. The breathing turned to gasping, then the line went dead silent. I held the receiver to my ear for several minutes, willing the voice to return. Nothing but absolute silence when I finally lowered the phone. I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dust on the shelf around the phone base had been disturbed. There were marks in it, 3 parallel lines like something had dragged fingers through the dust. I backed away from the shelf, my heart pounding. The marks hadn't been there earlier. I was certain of it. As I watched, the moonlight shifted, throwing the scratches into sharp relief. I ran upstairs and locked the basement door. I spent the rest of the night in my office with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. The next morning, I called Mike again and told him what happened. He came right over. The marks were still there in the dust. Mike photographed them and measured them carefully. "These are weird," he said. "It's not natural. That should have been the end of it." The phone was gone. Whatever was happening should have stopped. But that night, at exactly 11:30 p.m., the text appears to be a first-person narrative, and it seems that the writer is intentionally trying to convey a sense of unease, fear, and supernatural horror. Given that, I'll focus on minor adjustments to grammar, punctuation, and flow only. Here's the proofread text. "I shouldn't have bought that mirror. That's what I keep telling myself, as I sit here in the dark, watching it from across the room. My hands are shaking as I type this on my phone. I need to get this down to tell someone what's happening. Maybe then they'll understand." 3 weeks ago, I stopped at Randy's Antiques and Oddities, one of those junk shops that pop up in strip malls. I had just moved into my new apartment and needed some cheap furniture. The place smelled like old books and furniture polish. Dust floated in the sunlight coming through the grimy windows. The mirror stood in the back corner, 7 feet tall, dark wood frame carved with simple geometric patterns. The glass had that slight waviness you see in old mirrors. A yellow price tag hung from one corner, $75. "Good eye," Randy said behind me. I jumped. He was a skinny guy in his 60s wearing a Hawaiian shirt that's from an estate sale in Providence. Original owner died in 1962, been in storage ever since. I ran my hand over the frame. The wood felt smooth, worn by years of touching. "It seems cheap for something this old." Randy shrugged. "Previous buyers returned it. Said it gave them the creeps. Superstitious nonsense, if you ask me, but their loss is your gain." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why multiple people returned it, but the price was right, and it would look good in my bedroom. "I'll take it," I said. Randy helped me carry it to my car. The mirror was heavy, solid oak frame, he said as we tilted it to slide it into my trunk. I caught our reflection for a split second. I thought I saw something move in the background like a dark shape passing behind us. But when I looked over my shoulder, the parking lot was empty. Getting it up to my 3rd-floor apartment was a nightmare. I had to pay the building maintenance guy $40 to help. We positioned it in the corner of my bedroom, angled so I could see myself while getting dressed. The first few days were normal. The mirror did its job, reflected me the room. Nothing unusual. Then I started noticing things in my peripheral vision. Small movements like someone walking past quickly, but when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. I blamed it on being alone in a new place. The mind plays tricks when you're getting used to new surroundings, but the movements got more frequent and closer. A week after buying the mirror, I woke up at 3 a.m., needing to use the bathroom. As I walked past the mirror, I saw it clearly, a human-shaped shadow standing in the reflected version of my room, maybe 6 feet back from the glass. I froze. The shadow was darker than the darkness around it, like a hole cut in reality. It didn't move, neither did I. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Sweat ran down my back. I forced myself to turn and look at the actual room behind me. Empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, kept the lights on, and sat in my living room until sunrise. Told myself I was being stupid, that I was half asleep and seeing things. But I knew what I saw. The next night, the shadow was closer to the glass, maybe 4 feet back. I only caught glimpses, never could look at it directly in the mirror, like trying to see a star by looking slightly away from it. But it was there, waiting. I started covering the mirror with a sheet before bed, but every morning the sheet was on the floor. Used duct tape. The tape peeled off overnight. Tried pushing the mirror face first against the wall. By morning it had rotated back around. The shadow kept getting closer, 3 feet from the glass, then 2. Close enough now that I could make out more details. It was roughly my height and build. Its edges were fuzzy like smoke underwater, no features. I could see just absolute darkness in a human shape. Last night, it stood right at the glass. I lay in bed paralyzed with fear, watching it in the mirror. My breath came in short gasps. My sheets were soaked with sweat. The shadow raised what might have been an arm and pressed it against its side of the glass. The surface rippled like water. I ran, spent the night in my car in a Walmart parking lot, came back this morning, planning to get rid of the mirror. But when I opened my bedroom door, I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy, and cold. I could see my breath. The shadow wasn't in the mirror anymore. It stood in my actual room between me and the glass. Solid darkness, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in the world. It turned toward me where its face should be. There was only void. I slammed the door and ran. Now I'm sitting in my car again, watching the sunset. I can see my bedroom window from here. Something dark keeps passing by it. I tried calling Randy's shop to ask about the mirror's history. The number's disconnected. I drove by earlier. The store is empty. It looks like it's been closed for months. The battery on my phone is almost dead. I need to go back up there, try to deal with this. The shadow came through. It's in our world now, and somehow I know it's not done. It wants something else. Wants to trade places. Maybe put me on the other side of the glass. I'm going up there now. Have to face it. If anyone finds this, stay away from old mirrors. Don't buy them, don't look in them, especially if they're too cheap to be true. Sometimes there's a good reason. No one wants them. The sun just set. I can see a shadow moving in my bedroom window again. It's pressed against the glass, looking down at me. I think it's smiling. My hands won't stop shaking. The shadow is waving now, beckoning me to come up, and God help me. I think I'm going to need to know what's on the other side. Need to know why it chose me. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. Check the mirror in my bedroom. If you see someone trapped on the other side, banging on the glass, trying to get out,